Okay, I can't, now that I'm sharing screen, I can't see everybody. So if you've got a question, speak up. Don't raise your hand because you may not be in the panel that I have where I can see everybody. So here we are at week 6, where I'm calling it bishops, priests, and deacons, oh my, and general convention and mission. It's kind of the wrap up. We've spent there we go. We've spent time talking about worship and prayer. We spent a couple weeks talking about history. We spent a week talking about the Bible, and then last week we talked about how we think, how Episcopalians, Anglicans think theologically, and so tonight what we'll be talking about is how is the Episcopal Church structured, both in terms of leadership, but also in terms of sort of geographical structure and those kinds of things. And then we'll end by talking about what does mission mean for the Episcopal Church and Good Shepherd in the first part of the 21st century, because that's obviously changed over the course of time. If you were able to read the couple of chapters from the book, you'll have been reminded that, there were bishops that were sent out from the East Coast to be missionaries in the West, and to convert and save not only the natives, but all those mountain men and prospectors and all that kind of stuff. So there's been a history of mission as you would normally think about it, but is that what we're doing now? And so that's kind of an overview of what we'll be doing this evening. But again, I'll ask one last time if there are any questions from previous weeks. If not, then we'll just get going.
So, Gary, this is basically the last 2 chapters in the book, 6 and 7, right?
Right, exactly. Yep. Okay. So I decided to start. I'm starting in a different place than the book started. Okay. So because we are a worshiping body, I thought we should start kind of with, as I say, who stands where and why when we're worshiping, and everything sort of stems from that. We can talk about orders and all of that kind of stuff regarding where people stand or sit in the space. And so that's kind of what the direction that I'm going to take it. So in terms of the ordained ministry, so these are going to be the people who are generally up front. And we have, in the Episcopal Church, we have what are the 3 ordained orders: bishop, priest, and deacon. And you can tell usually what anyone is by what they're wearing. All right. So the bishop is there in the middle. He's got, there are a couple of things that are distinctive about him. One is he's got the stick. We don't call it the stick. We call it the stick, but it's really called the crozier. But most bishops call it their stick. And that is it's got, most of them have a crook at the end. It's like a shepherd's staff, which is what it was, sort of developed out of. They get pretty ornate, and a lot of times bishops will have more than one. And for example, I don't know about Bishop Kim, but Bishop Rob had one that always just stayed at St. John's Cathedral. And then he had a traveling one that was kind of like a 4-piece fly rod, it was in 4 pieces, and he'd screw it together when he would get to the church, and it would be, in a nice little carrying case. And a lot of times the ones that they carry around aren't as ornate as the one that they might leave in one place. I'm not sure. I think probably that's the way that Bishop Kim does it too. But anyway, so he's got the crozier, the hat, Um, and that's sort of a crown-ish thing. And that's part of the garb for a bishop. There's some other stuff that we'll see a little later. You can't tell. I don't think he's wearing some of the other stuff. He is wearing a cope, which is just a liturgical garment. I can wear one too, and I have. It's not necessary for a bishop to wear it. You don't have to be a bishop to wear a cope. But that's that cape thing that's open in the front. And then priests, and the two women on the right are priests. They have a stole that goes around their neck and drapes straight down in front. And so that's what you'll see me wearing, right? And the symbolism, there are some people that say that, take my yoke upon you. This is a mark of our yoke, being yoked to Christ. There are all sorts of theological symbols for why they wear that. The gentleman on the left is a deacon, and he wears the stole across his shoulder. And you'll see Nadine wearing one diagonally across. So if you see somebody wearing that diagonal, they're a deacon. If you see somebody with the stole coming down, some people cross it. That's really old school. I hardly ever see that anymore, that they'll wear the stole and then they'll cross it in front. That's just a stylistic preference.
Gary, is the deacon stole always from top left to bottom right?
Yes. Yeah. And the bishop, if you could see his stole, you kind of can under his right hand. Their stoles look just like a priest's stole. There's nothing different about that. So if you see a bishop wearing a stole, you couldn't tell that he or she was a bishop unless maybe he was wearing a purple shirt or had on a coat. So these are overlapping. These orders are overlapping, but clearly in the 1979 prayer book, it's made very, very clear that really everybody is ordained at their baptism. Everybody is an ordained minister at their baptism. And then clergy are called to special ministries, just as some lay folk would be called to special ministries. So in the book, this is all spelled out pretty well on page 100, that the ministry of the bishop is described as chief priest and pastor of the diocese, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And so if the bishop of the diocese is there, it is always his or her prerogative to preside at the Eucharist. So they can give that up, and sometimes they do. If they've just ordained a priest, they may have the priest preside, the new priest preside. But usually, if Bishop Kim comes, she's going to preside, she's going to preach. It's her prerogative. Now, of course, we have two retired bishops in the congregation, but they're retired. They are not the bishops of Colorado, either present or past. So they are, as they are there, Bishop Cal and Bishop Chris, as they are there, they're just members of the congregation, just like the the four retired priests that we have in attendance. So the priests are those who serve primarily in parishes, presiding at the Eucharist week to week, baptizing, teaching, preaching, and supporting the lay folk on daily basis. Okay, this is all on page 100. And then the deacons, their role, I really like the way that it used to be put, and it still is in some places. Their role was to interpret the church to the world and to interpret the world to the church. In other words, to be going out the door and to be ministering in the community and bringing the community's concerns to the church so that the church can address them. Now, that's not to say that I'm not supposed to do that, but if you think of the other things that I have on my plate, those are the ones that I'm supposed to be doing, spending most of my time doing. And this other stuff is what Deacon Nadine does, and she does it fabulously well. So those are what we call the biblical orders of bishop, priest, and deacon. Yet every Christian, by virtue of their baptism, is a minister And so we equip various lay people to do certain things, to help to distribute the chalice and the bread if need be. They're trained and commissioned to do that. It's not something that anybody couldn't do. It's just that they feel called to do that. We certainly need people to read lessons. We train people to take communion to shut-ins. But those are lay ministries that some people are called to and some people are not. But and a lot of times you'll see those folks up front. So any questions on that? I mean, we'll get into a little bit more of it as we go on, but right now I just wanted to see if there are any questions.
Father Gary.
Yeah.
I've noticed in more recently, you will actually change some of your garments during
Okay. Good.
the communion portion. Just curious about that.
Okay, so what I put, some priests will wear that garment, I'll say it, during the whole service. They'll just come in and then not put it on. It gets hot. It's called a chasuble, and it is it's kind of like a poncho, right? And it's a garment worn by a priest who is celebrating the Eucharist. So you may have three priests who are all celebrating. They may all have on chasubles, but if you're not celebrating, if you're not consecrating the elements, you don't wear one. Now, you don't have to wear one to consecrate the elements. I could do the communion right now without anything on, no collar, no stole, nothing, you know. But so I put that on at the point when we move from the service of the word, scripture, sermon, prayers, the creed. I put that on at the offertory to set the next portion of the service apart as the service of the sacrament, the service of communion. So yes, I do that. I don't do that at the 7:45 service. I just have a stole on at 7:45.
I have a quick question detail. I
Yeah.
noticed you were wearing purple this last worship.
Yep.
And is that for the preparation because of Easter coming?
Yes, sure. Yeah, the
Purple.
if you go back several times ago, we talked about the liturgical year, the cycle of the year, and each period of the church year has a color associated with it. And so Lent, the season that we're in right now, is the color for Lent is usually purple. Okay. We just came out of a green season. Epiphany is a green season. And when we get to Easter, that's all white. Or they might say the most joyful set of stuff that you've got. All right. And most that'll be white. Then we'll hit Pentecost, and the season after Pentecost is green. And then when we get to Advent, it's either purple or blue, depending on the tradition of the church. Christmas is white. So that's the sort of cycle. And then there are several times a year when we will wear red. Red is the color for the Holy Spirit, which is why these folks in the picture are all wearing red, because ordination is an infusion of the Holy Spirit. And so ordinations are always red. So each color helps mark the seasons. Okay? Good
Thank
question.
you.
Sure.
Yep.
So how did all this come to pass? Well, in the New Testament, we read about priests and rabbis, the Levitical priests, the people who offered sacrifices in the temple, and the rabbis, the teachers. So those were the offices or the orders in Judaism at the time of the New Testament. Well, Jesus, although he was called rabbi, we have no idea if he was ever trained as a rabbi. The New Testament would suggest no. But he called people together and set aside 12, and he gave them the title of apostles, which means the ones sent. So we read about, this is the kind of the first ordination that Jesus does, is he got his apostles. Then in the book of Acts, we read about deacons. There's a famous story in there where the apostles in Jerusalem are being called to account for not taking care of the widows of the Greek-speaking Christians, only really paying attention to the Jewish Hebrew speaking ones. And they said, we've got too much to do. We can't waste our time taking care of this. Waiting tables is what they called it. And so they set aside a group of 7 that were called deacons, and they served at table. That was their job, was to make sure that everybody got the handouts, whether it was money or food, that were being collected for those who were poor or marginalized. So there were 6 or 7 deacons. Saint Stephen was one of those, and he became the first martyr. So being a deacon didn't necessarily mean that you were going to be safe. We read also in the book of Acts of Philip, not the apostle Philip, but a guy named Philip who was called an evangelist. It sounds like he had the title of evangelist. The church recognized that. We're not quite sure what it means, but he's clearly called Philip the Evangelist in the book of Acts. So you start to see people being raised up in leadership in the church very early on, from Jesus on. Then as the church developed and it began to expand, we read about these other offices that people held in the churches, mostly because, Paul was writing to them and he's talking about them. So what I see here is these charismatic ministries, gifts that people have to prophesy, to teach, to heal. These were known as charismatic ministries, and we read about them mostly in the book of the 2 letters to the church in Corinth, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. But in lists of things, Paul will write, well, some are called to this, some are called to this, some are called to this, some are called to this. And so there seems to be a differentiation of folks' gifts and then honoring of their exercising of those gifts on behalf of the congregation. In Acts, it's recorded that the apostles began to appoint elders in churches to oversee these churches when an apostle wasn't there. Now, the word that gets used in Greek is presbyter. And that's the word that we get priest from. I'm a presbyter or I'm a priest. It's basically the same word, but it means elder. So in churches that don't have clergy that they call priests, they might call them elders, like the Methodist Church. Its senior clergy are called elders. They have bishops too, but the senior parochial clergy are called elders. They also have deacons. We'll get to that in a second. In the Presbyterian church led by presbyters, the clergy are called elders. All right. So where all of this comes from is different translations or transliterations of words that we find in the New Testament. So in the letter to the Philippians, Paul addresses overseers. The Greek word is episcopoi, which we translate as bishops, but it just means overseer. So at this time in the New Testament, that's all it meant. This person oversaw the congregation. It sounds like it's a little bit more bureaucratic than elders, who are just sort of, the respected elders. And then in the very, very late New Testament books of Titus and 1 Timothy, we see all 3 of these what we call biblical orders mentioned. The Episcopoi, the Presbyteroi, and the Diaconoi, the bishops, priests, and deacons, are all mentioned at the same time in the book, in the letter to Titus and in First Timothy. But those letters are really, most scholars consider them to be really late, either at the end of the first century or at the very beginning of the second century. So 60, 70 years after Jesus died. So you're talking two and a half generations of development of the church. And you know, when there's a movement started, you got to, how do you keep it going? You've got to figure out some way of handing on leadership, of overseeing groups. You know, who's the convener, who's responsible for calling the meeting, who's responsible for the food, you know, who's responsible for discipline. You have to put some kind of leadership cadre together. And so by the end of the first century, into the second century, we see in the New Testament all three of these mentioned in the same place, in the same section of these two letters. And that speaks to the development of the church over those first 60 to 80 years after Jesus died. So those are the orders that we consider when we talk about biblical orders. These are the orders that we find in the New Testament of leaders in the church, recognizing that there are these other ministries like teacher or healer, those kinds of ministries, but they aren't sort of liturgical organizational functions as much as they are helping functions. Yes, questions, Bruce?
What is, if we look at Catholicism, where they also have monsignors and cardinals and a different kind of hierarchy, how does that compare to the bishops, priests, and deacons that we follow?
Okay, so then it gets complicated.
You're
this
welcome
guy,
for the segue.
yeah, this guy with the funky hat's a cardinal. Okay, so when you, it used to be and still is in some parts of the Christian world, the bishop was was in charge of a congregation, and then would ordain priests to take care of things where he couldn't be. So then that became a geographical location that the bishop was over, and there might be 8 churches in that, let's say, in the city of, I don't know, Damascus. Let's say there's a bishop in Damascus, but there are 8 individual congregations, each led by a priest. And the bishop would show up every so often. Well, as dioceses got bigger and bigger, the responsibilities of that leadership, they needed different levels of leadership. So if you think of the Roman Catholic Church now, the head of the Roman Catholic Church is the Bishop of Rome. He's the bishop of the city of Rome, but he's also the Pope, right? And so under the Pope is another set of hierarchy that developed that had different responsibilities, cardinals, and then, who are bishops, but they've just been elevated to a higher level, more responsibility, more jurisdiction. Under them, there would be, archbishops and bishops. So it's a very top-down kind of triangle of hierarchy. Once you get to the parish level, there's a priest and deacons, and in a diocese there would be a bishop. So we have Denver is an archdiocese. So it's a very, very big diocese and is led by an archbishop. He has assisting bishops that help him do the work in the archdiocese. It extends up. I don't know how far it extends up. I know that it stops at county line, because at county line between Arapahoe and Douglas County, once you move into Douglas County, you're in the diocese of either Pueblo or Colorado Springs. It's different. So, but the Archdiocese of Denver has an archbishop. We do not have a cardinal. Our archbishop has not been made a cardinal, but there are cardinals who have been made, in Boston and Chicago and things like that. So the bishop, priest, and deacon, that level of leadership, you will see in the Roman Catholic Church. You'll see it in the Orthodox Church. It plays out a little differently in the Orthodox Church. and you'll see it in the Episcopal Church. So those are those orders and how they've worked their way out. It's a little bit of a sticking point when we talk to other Christian bodies that don't work in quite the same way. So the Methodists have bishops, elders, and deacons, but their bishops aren't quite the same as ours. The Lutherans have bishops and pastors and deacons. And the way that they understand those is a little bit different than ours. So we're relatively similar to the Roman Catholic Church and to the Orthodox Church, and less similar to some of these others. But we have the same kind of orders. We may not call them the same thing. Okay, I'll get to that a little bit more. Other questions before I move on?
So it's just there's no pope, pretty much. Just the Catholic, has popes.
Right. So at the very beginning, well, I won't say at the very beginning, but in the 4th and 5th and 6th century, I'm going to have to go let a cat out here in just a second. He was asleep on the chair next to me when I came down, but I think I woke him up by shouting. There were what were known as the 5 historical heads of the Eastern Church, or of the Church. 5 historical, what were called patriarchates: Alexandria, Jerusalem, Damascus, Rome, and Constantinople, or Antioch, and then Constantinople. And each one of those was led by a patriarch. The Pope is the patriarch of Rome, and there was sort of a dispute as to who was going to be the first among equals. And of course, the Pope said it would be him because it was the see of St. Peter, Peter, the chief of the apostles. So the successor to Peter should be the first among equals. The other patriarch said, nope, we're not going to do that. We're the first among equals in our patriarchate, but not with you. And now I have to go let the cat out. I'll be right back.
So we sort of know who runs the house in Gary's place, don't we?
Swim back in.
That was quick.
One more question, Gary.
Yep.
Where do friars and abbots fit in to the?
Okay, so friars are brothers. They can either be ordained or lay, but they are members of monastic orders rather than going up through the ordained ranks. So if you're in a monastery, you'll see a bunch of friars or a bunch of brothers or sisters. And some of them may or may not be ordained. Some orders don't have ordained members in them. Some do. An abbot is the head of a monastery. Okay, so that's a functional title as opposed to an ordained kind of title. Okay. So you see this, I love this picture because it used to be a long, long time ago that, you would march up these various levels until you could sort of get to be a bishop, right? And so you'd start out on the left of the picture with somebody being tonsured, and you can see that little thing that's cut out at the back of his head, the hair being cut out, saying that he wanted to enter into the process.
Yeah, here's the.
Yeah, he's the doorkeeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you get to the porter, somebody whose job it was to keep the door, exactly, the doorkeeper. And then you would move up to be a lector, a reader. And then this is a weird one. The exorcist was kind of its own order, but it was somebody who was going to cast out demons. And then the acolyte. Now you're getting into people who are actually helping work in the service. And the subdeacon, who had particular roles in the service, and the deacon, who had particular roles, the priest and the bishop. So the orders that are there in kind of pinkish purple, those are the biblical orders. But all of the rest of these developed over time, and most of them have fallen by the wayside. If you go to some churches, you'll certainly see acolytes, and you'll certainly see lectors, but they're not in the process of going anywhere. They're just helping out with the service. There's no expectation that they were going to kind of march up the hierarchical ladder. Subdeacon, you'll see those functioning in various churches, but they're lay folk. They're not in the necessarily, again, expecting to be ordained somewhere down the line. And depending on the church, they will have very specific jobs to do at the altar, perhaps helping set the table, or various other things, holding the book, for somebody to read, things like that. But you can see this hierarchy sort of going from tonsure, entering into the process, porter, lector, exorcist, acolyte, subdeacon, deacon, priest, and the bishop is kind of out of the picture here. But these are the way that the orders work. Now we don't do that anymore. We have the 3 biblical orders and the order of the baptized, of everyone. Okay, but I love the picture. It just speaks to some cool history. These are bishops. Okay.
Wow.
And when I mentioned with the first picture that we had of a bishop who was in a cope and a mitre, saying that the mitre was one garment that sets bishops apart. What you see here is the other garment that sets bishops apart. And what they're wearing, I'll come to the thing hanging around their neck in a minute. But what they're wearing, the red and the white stuff, is called a rochet and a shamir. And the rochet is the white garment. It usually has banded cuffs. You can see the banded cuffs. And then the shamir is the red overgarment.
Up a little closer, it'd be a little easier to tell.
And so you will see bishops wearing those. I can't remember. I'd have to go back and look at the pictures from when I was installed as rector. We had bishops there. Bishop Cal and Bishop Chris were there in the procession. I can't remember if they were wearing rochet and shamir. They probably were. So this is kind of the normal liturgical dress, unless they are going to celebrate the Eucharist, in which case they would be in an alb, looking like, and a chasuble, looking like any priest who is celebrating. Now, the thing that is hanging around their neck, in some cases, is a stole, just like the one that I wear every Sunday. So if you look in the front row, and you come to the 4th person in from the right, you see the thing that's around the neck that has all these sort of diamonds on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's just a stole. If you look at the 3 bishops that are really sort of right in the center, 2 of them have a green thing around their neck, and then the other one has sort of a red braided thing. Those are just stoles, all right? They're just liturgical stoles, and you can do that. The other bishops that are wearing the black thing, that's called a tippet. and it really has no liturgical it's just sort of a thing that you can see. They all have some kind of applique on them, some kind of a badge. Often that badge will show what seminary you went to. I have one. I just never get to wear it because we don't do the kind of services where you would wear that. I do it when I do morning prayer. If I was doing morning prayer on Zoom, I would put that on. But it's not a Eucharistic garment like the stoles are. So, but they're bishops, they can wear whatever they want. So this gathering, and I can't remember when this was, but this is a gathering of all of the bishops of all of the Anglican churches around the world.
Wow.
At Lambeth. You read about that, and if you watched the extra video, you heard Bishop Epting talk about Lambeth. This gathering of all of the bishops who are in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And I've looked at this, and I'd have to blow it up. I don't even know where he is in this photo. But the interesting thing about this photo is that there aren't very many women.
Yeah.
And at the last Lambeth, there were a lot, mostly from first world countries. So the picture of the gathered bishops changes, and it really gives you, I mean, you look how many dark faces are as opposed to light faces, that
Mhm.
tells you where the church is now, right?
Uh-huh.
So the church had a missionary impetus and is expanded, and now the global South really has the majority of Anglicans in the world. And I'll have a slide that'll show that. So the Anglican Communion, and now I'm sort of going backwards again from where the book did it. I'm talking, it started at the parish church and went up, and I started with clergy and went down, and now I'm going up. Now I'm starting at the Anglican Communion, and we're going to come back down. What that means is that we are recognized, churches are recognized as being in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. In other words, if the Archbishop of Canterbury went to one of those churches, he could take communion. If one of those churches went to Canterbury, they could take communion. I mean, it's literally that. You can eat at the same table. All right. So at the last Lambeth, which was in 2022, that was who went. Were dioceses, archdioceses, national churches who were in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Bishops were invited. Some chose not to go because they didn't agree with where Canterbury is going. Some chose not to go because their partners/spouses weren't welcome, made to feel welcome. So, but that's still the goal. I won't say the goal. That's still the description of what the Anglican Communion is. Somebody who is a church that is in communion with the Church of England as represented by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, there are several Anglican bodies that are out of communion. And I've got 3 of them listed there at the bottom. These are kind of the largest ones. And they are out of communion for several reasons. When the 1979 prayer book was made the official prayer book of the Episcopal Church, there was a group of churches that left the Episcopal Church over the 1979 prayer book. And those are mostly now called the Anglican Church in America. And there are only like 5,000 members of that church, 5,000 people. So it's very small. When women were ordained, this was the next sticking point. Another 35,000 dropped out.
Wow.
And they are often known as the Anglican Catholic Church. And if you go down to the University of Denver and you drive towards DU from, let's say, Colorado Boulevard on Iliff, you'll pass St. Mary's Anglican Catholic Church. And that is one of those churches. All right.
I was going to ask about that. We visited there a couple of times.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very,
So
it follows the prayer book. So it seems very similar, but I was wondering what the difference was. So.
yeah. So the Anglican Catholic Church will not ordain women.
Huh.
All right. Which also you can sort of, these are sort of different levels of I don't want to say exclusion. They're drawing the line at different places, right? So then there's another group, I didn't list it here, that's called the Anglican Church of North America. And it's hard to describe. A lot of them are Anglicans who are disaffected with the Episcopal Church, but are aligned with like the Anglican Church of Rwanda or Uganda. So they see their mission, that they see that the American church needs to have missionaries sent to it. So they are the Anglican Church of North America. And there are about 120,000 of them. And they have just published their new prayer book just a few years ago. It looks a heck of a lot like ours, but it's a little bit different. They might ordain women. They might not. it's kind of left up to local choice. They're pretty evangelical, maybe even charismatic, speaking in tongues and things like that. They do not want to have anything to do with sort of an LGBTQ population. So very, they're traditional and conservative, maybe not in terms of language, but in terms of morals and theology. I live right down the street from one of these churches. There's a Resurrection Anglican Fellowship is on Bellevue, between Dayton and Yosemite, right by the King Soopers on Bellevue, right near Cherry Creek High. That is an Anglican church. That's part of the Anglican Church of North America. Now, the other big group, and they are not technically in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. They say they are Anglicans. They're not so sure about the Anglican Church of, the Church of England. They're not even sure that they're Anglicans anymore. So it's all of this internal stuff that's going on. Then there's this organization called GAFCON, the Global Anglican Futures Conference, and it's made up of all sorts of Anglican groups from around the world. And they, who knows what the future of what has been known as the Anglican Communion will be. These are mostly national churches in the global South, but they have folks in the global North who may align with them. Some of the Anglican Church of North America folks may, for example. But most of these folks are from the global South, primarily Africa, but not just there. So the Anglican Communion has splintered over the last 50 years over a variety of issues. So when you drive down a street and you see something that advertises itself as an Anglican church, in the United States, that usually means that they are not affiliated with the Episcopal Church 90% of the time.
Okay. Makes sense.
So just that's just how it's sort of spun out. So this is kind of the modern member churches of the Church of England Anglican Communion. So if you look there, and if you're born in Britain, you're most likely born into the Church of England. So 13.4 million folks there. Well, not if you go to their churches, you won't see that many people in the churches in Britain. 2.3 million in the United States. Well, look at Nigeria, 17.5 million. So there are more Anglicans in Nigeria than Britain and the US and Canada put together. All right, 8 million in Uganda, 5 million in the Sudan.
Interesting.
So you can see how far the center of gravity of the Anglican Communion has shifted over the last 50, 7,500 years. And so there are a lot of folks, the Archbishop of Canterbury is appointed by the monarch. And a lot of these folks in Africa are saying, that person does not represent us. That person does not represent Anglicanism anymore, because we do, because we're the majority of the Anglican Communion here in Africa. So, and the numbers of Anglicans in Asia is pretty small. Most of them are in South India, but the rest.
Why, couple question, why do they make those, rules like that? Women are not allowed, or LGBT. Is that because it's coming like from UK kind of rules, or?
No, most of it has to do with how, so you remember we talk about how Anglicans think theologically, scripture, tradition, and reason. And what a lot of these churches in the global South are arguing, they're placing greater emphasis on scripture, and then a little less on reason, and a little less on tradition, and then a lot less on reason. And then, of course, in some of in the countries in Africa, especially, questions of homosexuality are much more problematic. Women's leadership much more problematic, especially if you think about how Christians in those countries are interrelating with Muslims
Mm.
and things like that. So it
It's
has
like a
to
cultural thing involved, right?
say again?
Kind of. Is it cultural involved?
Yeah. So there's a lot of cultural stuff going on as well. Just as you could say there's a lot of cultural stuff going on in the United States,
Yeah.
and that a number of the conservative Anglican bodies in the United States
Yeah.
have separated over these same issues, right?
Yeah.
So it's just the weight of numbers is so much greater in Africa.
Mm.
And so Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada, and the UK, for the most part, Western, first world countries, industrially developed, culturally progressive for the most part. But the countries in Africa and in Asia aren't there, or in South America aren't there in the same way.
Is almost.
Agree.
So he might be in bed already.
So in the United States, we are a national church. For a while, we were called the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States of America. All right, PECUSA, it was the way that we would talk about it. And so we are a national church, and with a couple of exceptions, but everything is in the United States. We are not led, I suppose you could say, but at the top of our pecking order of bishops is what we call the presiding bishop. Other national churches might call him or her the archbishop, but we call him the presiding bishop, and that's Michael Curry, commonly known as the royal wedding preacher, right? So his office, the National Church office, is in Washington, D.C., or is in New York City. But the church then has been divided up for functional reasons, primarily into provinces. And you can see that they vary in size and in population. So if you think of Province 6, we're in Province 6 there, the green one in the middle. You put all of the population of Province 6 together, and it might be about the same as Province 2. With all of with New York and all of those big cities there. You think about Province 5, and some of it has to do with geography, obviously. Province 8, which is where I came from before I came to Colorado, is huge geographically, because it includes Alaska and Hawaii and Taiwan. All right. So I was the Episcopal coordinator for higher education in Province 8. So I would work with all the campus ministries. And I visited in one way or another, I visited most of the dioceses in Province 8. I never made it to Alaska, and I never made it to Taiwan. But I did have to go to a meeting once in Hawaii, so that got me to Hawaii. But I've been to the campus ministries in all of these other places. And it used to be that each province got a set amount from the national church to help us do, the coordinators help us do that work. And I went back to the national church and I said, this makes no sense that I get $2,500 a year and the provincial campus minister in Province 1 gets $2,500 a year when he can walk from diocese to diocese in one day, and I have to fly to get anywhere. And they finally came up, they saw the logic of that and changed the way they distributed money. But so really the way that these provinces were formed, and it mentions this in the book, was to engage in common ministry, recognizing that there are differences geographically. Province 2 may not, in New York and New Jersey, may not have as high a need for Hispanic ministry, I'll just use that, as, let's say, Province 7 or Province 8. But they have a lot of need of ministry with another group of people. Now, that may be, there are a lot of Hispanic, Puerto Ricans and things like that in the Northeast. But, if you think about Province 4, down in the South, a lot more African Americans than there are in many of the other provinces. So they might glom together to figure out how to do common programming, address common issues among certain subpopulations that other places might not have to deal with in quite the same way. So now we are part of Province 6. Province 8, I saw as being a very active province in Hispanic ministries and Asian ministries, Episcopal Church women, campus ministries. I haven't seen it active quite in the same way in Province 6. I saw it in Province 4, and I knew that it was going on in Province 5. I just haven't seen it as active in Province 8. But everybody who goes, you hardly ever see the province working. It does, but you don't see it. There's an annual gathering, and there are delegates that might be sent, but it's not official in the same way that a diocese is. So anyway, so that's province. Every 3 years, usually, all of the dioceses in the United States, or in the Protestant Episcopal Church of the United States, meet together to conduct business and to change policies, to talk about the prayer book, to talk about worship. That's known as the General Convention. The last General Convention, I haven't updated this slide. The last one was in 2022. It was supposed to be every 3 years. So you can see from the seal there that the one was held in Austin, Texas in 2018, which meant that the next one was going to be in 2021. What was going on in the summer of 2021?
COVID.
We were coming out of COVID. So they postponed it and to 2022, compressed it, and only conducted such business as was absolutely necessary. And then they're going to get back on cycle this summer in 2024. So if it would have been on the real 3-year cycle, it would have been 18, 21, 24. So now we're going to get back in 24. One of the reasons that we have to do that is that we have to elect a new presiding bishop whose terms are 9 years. And so we can't put that off. So there's going to be a new, we will have a general convention in 2024. Convention is just the triennial gathering of the church, and it is run. The church doesn't stop working when general convention's not in session, and so it is the presiding bishop and what's known as the executive council that runs the Episcopal Church, the business of the Episcopal Church, when convention is not in session. All right. So they'll make interim decisions and things like that. They'll take care of the business of the church in between. And then there are also these what are known as interim bodies that will continue working from convention to convention. A convention may make a decision saying, we need to report on this at the next convention. And then there will be an interim body that will be doing that. So a convention may say, we want a new prayer book. So there will be a body, there is a body out there that is working on coming up with ideas for what that new prayer book might look like, for example. Okay. So here are all of the bodies and all of these bits and pieces of things that make up the running, the bureaucracy of the Episcopal Church. You see the General Convention is at the top, not the presiding bishop. The General Convention is the top, and it is bicameral, like the American government. You got the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies, and you have a president of each one of those. The president of the House of Bishops is the presiding bishop. Okay? And then you can see there are all of these other things that are interim bodies, and you see the parishes and dioceses over on the left-hand side. If you really want to look at this, you can, when you're tired of looking at the creed chart and it hasn't put you to sleep, this one will help. All right. So it all makes sense if you kind of understand it, but it's dotted line reporting and all of that kind of stuff. Yes, Bruce.
Can the presiding bishop be reelected, or is it just a finite term?
9 years. In and out. Yep.
That's a long time.
Yeah, it is. It is. And of course, our current presiding bishop, Michael Curry, African-American, first African-American male. Before that was Catherine Jefferts Shorey, first female presiding bishop. So when she went to Lambeth, there were some bishops who didn't think that she should be there, and they weren't going to show up. Bishops from the global South who didn't believe in the ordination of women, and to have a woman lead the American church, we're not going to, So the cultural stuff begins to impinge on how we get along. Okay, so in the Diocese of Colorado, we are led by Bishop Kimberly Lucas. That, I guess her husband took that photo. That was when she got the call that she'd been elected. So she was at home in Washington, D.C., and the election happened at St. John's Cathedral here in Denver. And when it became clear that she was the choice, somebody made the phone call, and that was apparently her taking that phone call. So she's been here about 4 years. Pardon?
So she was in DC and she's elected to this the archdiocese here. Is that normal? Like do the bishops get selected from different from just pretty much anywhere, or?
Yes. So basically what happens is when there is a vacancy, or there's going to be a vacancy. I mean, a vacancy can happen because somebody can die, right? But most often a bishop will announce that he or she is going to retire, and then the diocese needs to find a new bishop. And they'll put together a job description, just like a church would, an individual church, and they'll shop it out. And people may apply, or people may be nominated, and then there would be a committee, a search committee, on behalf of the diocese that would sift through all of the resumes and come up with 3 to 5 candidates. And then those candidates would come to the diocese, and they could be internal or they could be external. And they would come to the diocese and do what everybody calls the dog and pony show, travel around the diocese, giving a little spiel and answering questions in different places. So everybody has an opportunity to kind of get a feel for who they are. And then there is an election. And the election is unusual because the clergy vote and the laity vote. And each house has to, a majority of each house has to elect. So it's not a simple majority. The majority of the lay folk have to agree on the bishop, and the majority of the ordained folk have to agree on the bishop. That's different than any other election in the Episcopal Church, where it's just, majority. But here it's both. The clergy have a vested interest in who's going to be their pastor, and the laity have a vested interest in who's going to lead the church. And getting both to line up usually takes 4 or 5 ballots or even more. Because if you don't get it, then you stop, take a break, and then you vote again. And theoretically, you're in prayer and discernment in those breaks. Depending on where you are, there might be a lot of politicking going on. And what happened in this diocese with when Kim was elected is we had 3 candidates. One was rejected even after he'd already been approved after some unsavory details of his leadership style uh, became public. So he pulled out, which left us with only two candidates, both women. One was internal and one was Bishop Kim. And so the clergy originally, early on, all voted, I won't say all, but the majority of the votes were going to the internal candidate, and most of the laity were voting for Bishop Kim. And so it was a question of how were we going to get closure. And finally, I think that most of the clergy who had sort of been behind the internal candidate recognized the way that the wind was blowing and said, okay, we really like the other person, but we see what the church is wanting, and we'll go in that direction. So yeah, they can be from anywhere. When I left California, just 2 or 3 years before I left California, we had a bishop election, and the fellow who was elected Bishop of California was already a bishop in Alabama, but he was an assisting bishop. So which made it okay for him to run in California. So here was a bishop who's already a bishop, who knew what that was all about, and California elected him. So yeah, it's kind of wide open. And then what happens after the election is that the majority of seated diocesan bishops have to agree, and a majority of the standing committees, so that's the body that runs the church in the absence of the bishop, kind of like the vestry for the diocese. The majority of the standing committees also have to agree that that person should be bishop. So there are a lot of checks and balances in this, a lot of discernment. Yes, Bruce.
Was Kim a bishop when she applied, or was she elected to bishop?
No, she was just a parish priest. That's what usually happens. So the Diocese of Colorado is divided up, again, like the national church is divided up into provinces. Colorado is divided up into regions, again, to help facilitate common mission, common ministry. We are in the High Plains region, that being the magenta one in the upper right-hand corner. And you can see our region extends from Denver to the Kansas and Nebraska borders. We don't have a lot of churches out in the plains. We have a few, but not many. And we are the Front Range region, that sort of teal green one up in the upper center, is divided from the High Plains by the Platte River. So we are just across the river from a church in Littleton. That its address is Littleton, St. Gregory's. We're across the Platte River. They're in the Front Range region, and we're in the High Plains region. And, we've got a congregation in Sterling that's 150 miles away, but we're not in the same region as one that's 7 miles away. So, boundaries have to be drawn for some reason. But again, these are to facilitate common ministry. And so we do. High Plains does wonderful stuff. All of the regions do really, really good things. So you'll hear talk about parishes and missions. A parish basically, or a mission is a congregation that is planted by a diocese or a larger parish. And the person who is in charge is known as the vicar, the person who stands in place of the leader, which might be the bishop, or might be, if the mission was established by a parish, is standing in place for the rector of that parish. That's the mission of it's a mission in Carmel, California. I just thought I'd throw that in just because it's such a nice building. We have missions in mission churches in Colorado. Usually what it means is they are not financially self-sufficient. All right. So they're too small to be financially self-sufficient and receive assistance, financial assistance, both from the diocese or maybe from the region to keep that congregation going. And it may be that it was a thriving congregation in some town, and the industry that was helped make that town viable left, and all of the people left, and now there are only 7 people that are still part of that church. They can't afford to keep a full-time priest. So there's a mission in Georgetown, for example, that there's Sunday services, they have 12 or 15 people, but we keep that mission going. Bruce?
Is a vicar an ordained person?
Yes. Yes. Maybe a deacon, or a priest, but is an ordained person. Then a parish is financially self-supporting. The head of the congregation is the rector, that's me. The book says comes from Latin for ruler. I like what I was told by an old priest, or a story about an old priest with a young priest saying rector comes from the Latin king. Don't forget it. So, but that's the Latin rule, the Latin root. Why we call it that. Pastor is a functional term, somebody who is the leader or the pastor of the sheep. Rector has to do with a sort of a bureaucratic way of talking about it. No one would call me Rector Brower or Rector Gary. They might call me Pastor Gary, but they wouldn't call me Rector Gary. Okay, so difference between those terms. If you're in a mission, what we would call a vestry is called the Bishop's Committee. And the senior warden would be the bishop's warden in a mission. In a parish, you've got a senior and a junior warden. Right now, that's Andy Folkerth and Marge Pagula. And then we have a vestry. That's the lay governing body of the church. And as the book says, I'm responsible for worship and all those kinds of things. Theoretically, the vestry is responsible for finance in the building. And so we work together on all of that. But technically, as the rector, the building is mine. I'm responsible for what goes on in it overall, but not necessarily for the upkeep. So real quickly, we're going to run out of time here. We do have ways that govern us, and we've talked about one, and that's the Book of Common Prayer. That governs how we worship. And if you look through the book, you'll see stuff that's in bold print, see stuff that's in regular print, and see stuff that's in italics. Usually the stuff that's in italics tells you how to do the worship. Regular print is what you say. And the what's in italics used to be printed in red, and so those are called rubrics because rub is the root for red. And we have what are called may rubrics and shall rubrics. And so the mays are optional and the shalls are not. And the rubric might say, then the priest shall do this. Okay, I do it. Then you may say this. Well, okay. At Good Shepherd, and a lot of churches in Colorado, not just in Good Shepherd, but don't see it so much in other places. You can add that the A word that we aren't supposed to say during worship in Lent, Alleluia. There will be places in the prayer book that says that in Easter you're supposed to say this, and you may say it at other times. Okay. And then, of course, at the back of the prayer book, we have this thing that's called the outline of the faith that really, we talked about this last week a little bit, talks about what we believe, also talks about what the orders are, talks about a lot of this stuff. So this is one of our books of rules. The other one is called the Constitution and Canons. This is exactly what it says. It's our Constitution and our Book of Laws. And this is the national one. We also have one for the Diocese of Colorado. And it talks about how we are organized. How often are you going to have a convention? Who can go to a convention? What does worship look like? What does it take to get ordained? What are the qualifications we expect of ordained ministers? What happens if somebody starts spouting heresy? A priest starts spouting heresy. How do we try? What does an ecclesiastical court look like? Or something like that. Or if somebody's found in an abusive relationship or is engaged in abusive relations, what does the church do with that? That's different than what the secular arm of government might do. You know, the government might, the courts might throw you in prison. That doesn't mean that you're no longer ordained. It's only the church that can make that decision, for example. I'll just use that as an example. So the Constitution canons, and then the rules of order. If you know Robert's Rules of Order, you got to know how to run a meeting. And we have a modified Roberts that's contained in the Constitution canons. So that's how we run ourselves. That's a lot. And now I want to talk about mission. So according to the prayer book, in the outline of the faith, it says the mission of the church, this is what we're supposed to be doing, is to restore all people to unity with God and each other. That is what our mission is. And so that's preaching the gospel, it's doing all sorts of stuff. And so, the question is, what does that mean in 2024 and beyond for the church in general, but also at Good Shepherd? Unfortunately, we have in our baptismal covenant, these clauses that help us understand what our mission is. We're supposed to proclaim by word and example the good news of God in Christ. We're supposed to seek and serve Christ in all persons. We're supposed to go out and do this, to respect the dignity of every human being. This phrase, cherish the wondrous works of God and protect the beauty and integrity of all creation. That's not in the prayer book now. That was proposed a number of years ago and has been tabled because of COVID. And it might get thrown into the prayer book at its next revision. So this is where one of the interim bodies of convention was doing its work. We're supposed to strive for justice and peace among all people. We're supposed to be engaged and to bring the gospel into the world in these various ways. Now, that may be direct evangelism, trying to convert people. It may be through providing human relief, whether it's hospitals or schools or things like that. That's mission, more broadly understood, working in a food pantry. That's mission. That's carrying the love of Christ into the world. It's not the same thing as preaching. It's using our actions to show the good news. And so now we're in that strange place, and the book, I think, brought it out, is we live in a very different world, a very sort of multi-faith world. Is our call to convert people the same as it may have been 100 years ago? I'm not arguing for or against it. I'm just saying that's a real question that people are engaged with. What does it mean to be, to bring all people into unity? Does that mean we all have to be the same? What does that mean in terms of various Christian bodies? What does it mean to be in unity with folks that aren't Episcopalian, that aren't Catholic? How do we do that? How are we in unity with God, with our Muslim brothers and sisters, our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Hindu? How do we do that? That's sort of the cutting edge way of thinking about mission now. Whereas other people, for a long time, it was sort of, I hate to use the word converting the heathen. That would, been the way that it was talked about 60, 75, 100 years ago. So that's where we're struggling right now, is what's the mission of, I don't want to say struggling, I think it's morphing, but what is the mission of the church in 2024? And what does that look like? Where is the mission of the church with regard to issues of creation care? Where is the mission of the church in regards to racial reconciliation? What's the mission of the church in regards to a suicide epidemic? What's the mission of the church with regard to influx of migrants? What's the mission of the church with regards to increasing level of gun violence? All of these things are issues that the church addresses. How we do it is not simple, right? But when we think that we're supposed to be a loving body and to be the body of Christ, the body of Christ is engaged in mission in the world. How are we going to do that? So the Episcopal Church has a long history, or the Anglican Communion has a long history in engaging of all of those kinds of missions, from schools to direct evangelism to social activism. All of those kinds of are parts of what various Episcopal bodies, Anglican bodies, have been doing ever since the Anglican Church has been the Anglican Church. And certainly what the Church has been doing ever since the Church has been the Church, has been engaging in mission. So that was a big rush. I wanted to stop here. We'll do one more thing before we close, but I want to see, again, I rushed through that organizational stuff really quickly. Are there other questions about either the organization of the church, of anything that we've talked about this evening, or of the mission of the church and how that does or does not relate to Good Shepherd?
So Gary, I've not seen this in past years, but we're spending more time this Lenten season with the BCP than we have before. Was that by design?
Well, it depends on whose design. Yes, I believe that using a variety of the variety of options that we have at our disposal is a valuable worship experience. Hearing different words triggers different things in our minds. Hearing different rhythms. So if you're talking about the use of Rite One, yes, that was by design. We were going to do that in 2020. We started doing that in Lent of 2020, and then we were closed down. And so I thought, well, let's pick it back up and do it again. But I've also heard from some folks that they wanted to sing some of the things that go with Rite One. So the Healy Willen setting of the Mass, the service music, was written for traditional language. And it's beautiful music, and we hardly ever sing it anymore because it was set for a different set of words. So I, and a lot of lifelong Episcopalians of my generation, all us old people, we remember a lot of all of these old words.
Our generation.
And to hear the rhythm of the traditional says something to us that, the 79 book doesn't in quite the same way. For people who've never been a part of that, then to hear it and to say it slows the thinking down, which I think is a good spiritual exercise. So yes, it was by design, mine, but that's because I'm the rector, I'm the king, right? And I can say, we're going to use this book. And, so there are a lot of people who say, oh, it's so good to hear that again. So.
Well,
Yeah.
are we changing the verbiage now so it is he must be obeyed?
No, I am not the who must be obeyed. So, other questions? Again, you
have
may.
one question
Yeah,
about
yeah.
you sent an email about baptism and confirmation and receive. Because I came from the Catholic, right? So I got baptized, I got confirmed, and so for here, is it equivalent, or do I need to redo the whole thing too?
No. Okay. So this is my last slide.
Oh,
And it sort of picks up. That was kind of the last thing I wanted to do. So I'll come back to that, or
Yeah.
I'll hit it right now. But I want to
Yep.
make sure if there are any other questions on any of the material that we've covered either tonight or even going back further. Amy, Kristen, Matt? No? Okay. So the email that I sent out has this information on it, that depending on your individual circumstance, should you want to do any of these are your options. So if you've never been baptized, baptism would be the first option. And sometimes I've seen that happen at the regional confirmation. And we also, if you wanted to be baptized at that point, you could. We are doing baptisms. We will be doing baptisms at Easter Vigil, the 30th of March, should you want to be baptized. If you're already baptized, regardless of what church, then there are three formal things that can happen. They don't have to, all right? You're welcome at Good Shepherd. You're welcome to receive it, communion at Good Shepherd, all of that kind of stuff. None of this is necessary. It has to do with how you affiliate with the Episcopal Church in general, the Episcopal Church in the United States. So if you were a part of a church where you were confirmed, baptized and confirmed by a bishop, like the Roman Catholic Church, like the Lutheran Church, like the Orthodox Church, then you would be received. That middle bullet point, you would be received.
Okay.
Okay. And the language is, the bishop would say with you a prayer is, we recognize that you are already a part of the global church. We welcome you into our family. Okay? If you've only been baptized, or you've been a member of a different Christian body that had some sort of confirmation process, I'm thinking primarily of Methodists or Presbyterians or something like that, then you want to become, a member of the Episcopal Church, whatever that means, you would be confirmed. And that puts you in, basically the bishop says, you're in communion with me. Okay? All right, so there's a laying on of hands. This is one of the sacraments and one of the 7 sacraments. So I was confirmed. I wasn't born an Episcopalian. I was confirmed by Bishop William Swing in 1979. So at a cathedral in San Francisco. So that's an option. If you're a lifelong Anglican, lifelong Episcopalian, you've been confirmed, but for whatever reason, you've decided that your faith has been reawakened, I'll just put it that way, for whatever reason, and you want to say, I don't remember my confirmation, I don't remember my baptism, but I want to make a public statement in front of a bishop that I reaffirm what was said on my behalf or what I said at my confirmation. Then you would do what's known as the reaffirmation of baptismal vows. That's an option. All of these are options. None of these have anything to do with what you can or can't do at Good Shepherd, with the the only exception would be baptism. And right now, the Episcopal Church is of the opinion and doctrine that baptism admits you to the Lord's Supper, admits you to communion. That's what brings you into the family. Some other churches, the Methodists, for example, say you should be able to take communion if you feel like it. It's not the meal of the family. It's a way that God gets in touch with you. The Episcopal Church really still says it's the meal of the family, and to eat that meal, you should be part of the family. Okay. So
do you take classes for to get received, or
you just did it.
oh, okay.
That's what this 6 weeks has been, to give you that knowledge of what the Episcopal Church is all about and how it might be different from what you grew up with, or what you've forgotten.
Yeah.
So that you have the right kind of material to make the decision that you want to make, however that is. And if you have any questions about any of this, or you want more explanation or anything like that, please don't hesitate to let me know.
Okay.
But those are the options. Now, again, baptism we will do on March 30th. We'll do it again on May 19th, the day after this regional confirmation, because that's the Feast of Pentecost. And baptisms are often done on the birthday of the church. We're bringing new people into the church, so we baptize them on Pentecost. But that's a parish-wide celebration. the confirmation, reception, reaffirmation of the baptismal vows is done in front of a bishop, not in front of a priest. So that's the difference. If last year Bishop Kim came and was able to do that, do this at Good Shepherd. She's not going to be a Good Shepherd for another year. So we go to the regional confirmation in the years when she's not coming to visit us. Okay. Any questions on any of that?
Amy
Gary?
was trying to
Amy.
ask a
Amy,
If I decide to do the confirmation, do I have to apply through you,
No.
or how does this work?
just let me know. We will get probably within the next month. I'll get a letter from the bishop or from the bishop's office saying the regional confirmation is coming up. Who do you have that want who are your candidates for confirmation? Who are your candidates for reception? Who are your, just so that they know how many chairs to set up, right? You know, they leave that really up to me, up to the parish to do that preparation, to send those names in. And then we've got a big register. I take that in and the bishop signs it. So it's all official. It's pretty cool. You know, so you just let me know if that's what you want to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said that Kim would probably come next year.
Say it again.
You said that Kim would come to
Yeah, I haven't seen her calendar for 2025.
okay.
You know,
So when she comes to parishes or churches, does she typically end up doing confirmations?
oh yeah. Yeah. Like I said, we did them when she came last spring. We had a number of people who were confirmed, received. I don't think we had any reaffirmations, but we had several who were confirmed and received at Good Shepherd when she came last spring. Yeah. So, you know, like I say, none of this really has to be done. I'm just saying, these are your options for what's next. It's in your court, and I'm happy to work with you however that looks. Matt, did you have something? Did I see your hand?
Yes. So I know where I sit with, my past. That sounds weird, but how I grew up in the Catholic Church, like other members here. So the reception would be an option for me. In terms of, I'm actually thinking more specifically about my children. I know baptism would be first step, but when does that process typically happen, for children or youths as they mature in the church?
Right. The way it used to be, and I think it probably still is, that Colorado wants kids to be like 15. They want the kids to really be able to know what they're doing, not just at age 11 when they start sprouting hair in weird places on their bodies, but when cognitively they really know what they're doing. And so that's this diocese that is sort of set that as the standard. And that was the old, I don't think it's changed. That's how it was under the previous bishop. We do at Good Shepherd offer First Communion classes for kids. That sometimes parents want them to do that before they take their First Communion. Others say, no, as long as my kid's baptized, I want them to have communion. We'll have them take the First Communion class just so they have a better understanding about what they've been doing, but it's not an entry rite. It's more of a historical kind of artifact that a lot of families like to have their kids go through. But confirmation is generally mid to late adolescence.
Okay. And that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I was confirmed. I forget. I'm not confirmed. I was baptized because I came up a different church. I think I was 12, so I was supposed to be an adult to know what I was doing at 12 in terms of being baptized. So the moving it up to 15, I think makes a little bit more sense. Not that I've regretted anything, but yeah. So that.
Yeah, I know. I had to be 16 when I was confirmed. I think that was
yeah.
but okay.
Okay. Bruce, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say for Matt that you can talk to Sue LaFont because there are confirmation classes that are held for teens that are looking to be confirmed in the
Yeah,
church.
but his
Yeah.
his
We're
kids,
still a little bit of ways.
yeah,
We-
his kids have a ways to go. Yeah, and there are diocesan wide confirmation classes.
Mhm.
But if we know that we've got kids at Good Shepherd, then we will put one together. And
No,
sometimes
that's great to know.
yeah, and sometimes we partnered with other churches. You know, if we've only got two, and let's say St. Tim's has three and St. Gabe's has two, we might come up with a confirmation class of seven and then share the load in terms of teaching and mentoring and those kinds of things. It's a good question. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Any other questions anybody has? Again, please grab me and if you don't already, grab me and get the chart for the creed thing. But also if you have any questions about confirmation, reception, reaffirmation of baptismal vows, baptism, all of that kind of stuff, please see me. Don't let something go by because you didn't ask the question.
This has been wonderful, Gary. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been fun. I like doing this. I love the questions. Sometimes they're kind of the same each year, and sometimes they come in from all sorts of different directions and are a lot of fun. So I enjoy this. So
Yeah, no, thank you.
very
Yeah.
much.
Thank
yeah,
you.
and
Thank you,
I
Gary.
will in the next. You'll see something coming out in a week or so. I will put together a single or maybe double session on the prayer book. It again would be like on a Monday night, but I have to give you enough warning so that you can borrow a prayer book. If you don't have one, you can borrow a prayer from the church, because this is not something that I can kind of talk you through. I want you to be able to turn pages and see how it works. And I'm assuming, given the questions that have come up, that really it's how do you use this for yourself? How is this a book that is for you? Not that something on Sunday morning where we say turn to page 379. How do you know what page to turn to on a daily basis or a monthly basis or something like that? So it's how do you use this for yourself, not how do we use it in public worship? Because you're always going to get an instruction in public worship if you're going to use a prayer book, what page to turn to.
Yeah, I picked up one, and it's interesting to go through. But like you look at the daily, the daily
Offices
offices,
and then the lectionary.
and you're reading it, and it said, and the priest or leader says this, and then you say this, and it's like, do I say them both?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I understand. Because I do morning prayer. I do most of those offices every day, and I say both of them.
Yeah,
The Lord be with you. I don't know if I'm due with the Lord be with,
with
you.
you.
Also too, but there are these things called the suffrages and responses where there's a leader and then the respond, and I say all of that. So, I've got all those words. They roll around in the back of my mind, and they begin to take hold of you, and you hear them at odd times. And so it becomes part of who you are. And so, for example, to get back to Bruce's question and write one, I can look at Bishop Cal and I can look at Bishop Chris and I can look at Nadine. And when I'm saying, or when we're hearing the prayers of the people with all of that old language, I see these eyes saying, yes, 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 we hear what you're saying, and Nadine, if you didn't notice, during consecration prayer, there's a place where I hit my chest. Although we are unworthy through our manifold sins to offer, Nadine, of course, she wasn't there last week, so she just saw this on Sunday. She said, if you hadn't done that, I was going to do it. So even some of these gestures, were part of that old form, and it really hits some of us at a really deep level because we used it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's value in all of that. But yeah, that's how do you do that's a really great question, Darren. If you're doing it by yourself, do you say both things? That's a great question, So we'll talk about that. And I'll make sure that I give everybody at least a week's worth of notice so that they can if they don't already have a prayer book, can borrow one from the church. So that, and I'll open this up to anybody, not just to this group, but I'll make it open to everybody. So anyway,
Should
it's late.
recording? Might you
Oh,
be
it'll be
recording?
recorded. Of course it will be.
Okay, you will. Okay. very good.
I record everything unless I forget.